So the map is the most important tool in Battlebit, and I see a lot of people not even care about it. This tool has been underutilized in pretty much every game I've ever played. Squad, Battlefield, Call of Duty, and now Battlebit. So I'm going to go ahead and explain how to read and extract the information using the map. Now this is a shortened down version of this video, and I only have 2 examples for you. Now I highly recommend you check out my long version of this video where I do a gameplay analysis of how I use the map, and I explain more in detail on different scenarios and how to read maps and all that. So if you're interested, watch that. You'll have a very good foundation by the end of it. So anyways, let's get into the first example here. So the first example here, what can we tell off of this immediately? Most of you will say, well, there's enemies here. That's true. But how do you come to that conclusion? Well, the way that and the reason why I'm using this one as the first one is because it seems so obvious, but when we go on to the second image, it's not going to be as obvious. You're not going to see it as clear as I would, or most of you wouldn't at least. So let's use this easy one as our first example. So how do we know that there's people on Charlie? Well, first we can see all these guys grayed out. When they're grayed out like that, it means that they're in combat, bleeding, or something. People are near them. They're involved in some form of combat. They're not spawnable by squad members. So you can see by just the volume of people that are in combat, immediately, boom, we know that there's a shit ton of enemies over here. We can also use the flag here as a scale, and eventually, if you watch if this continued to play and it wasn't an image, you would see this bar fill up and become a full square, and that is useful because it's used as kind of like a scale. If the enemies cap this with this many teammates on the point, immediately we'll be able to see that they have an equal and even more amount of players inside the cap zone. So now let's actually look at this from a more macro view. So where are the enemies coming from? Well, eventually they cap Bravo fully, and now they have a steady stream. Even if squads get wiped off here, right? Even if they get wiped off Charlie, they now have a steady stream of resupplies coming in from Bravo. Same thing for us. We have a steady stream of people coming in from Delta to Charlie. Now, the problem with this map is that it's 2D, and we don't have that verticality. Now, like I explained in my more detailed video, you can actually use the points when you're in game to have a good visualization of your team in a 3D kind of format. So what you lose with a TD map, with the 2D map, is verticality, but you gain that in game. So you can make up for that loss of the 3-dimensional aspect of looking at a top-down 2D picture, pretty much, with the in-game. So again, I can't really explain it since I'm not in-game, but we can see if we go into game here, the majority of the players here are under the ship. They're not on top. So what does that lead us to conclude? The first thing it leads us to conclude is the majority of enemy players are holding them at the bottom of the ship. Where can they hold them from? Well, they can hold them from the top of the ship because there's a crack, as you can see in the picture, and in game there's a little crack in the ship right here, cutting it in half, that they're probably looking down at. And something that a lot of people don't take into account is, where is your team not at? Because we know where the team is at, and since the team is there, we can safely assume that where they're at, there's no enemies. So wherever our team isn't, that's a possibility of having an enemy there. And since this is such a contested point, we have so many people here, it's safe to assume by the lack of players on the top of the deck of the ship means that there's probably a shit ton of people up there, a shit ton of enemies up there. And so that's what we should be playing for, and that's what you'll see me play for in my detailed explanation. You'll see me run up to the top deck because I see there's not a lot of players up there. Now let's go ahead and move on to the more interesting example here. And this is a little bit more ambiguous. This, immediately off the bat, we can tell 2 things. We have Cap Charlie, and they have Cap Bravo. And now they're fighting in between Charlie and Bravo. But where are they fighting? Well, since you know that the people are grayed out here, right? you can see all these grayed out symbols, we can immediately assume that they're coming out of Bravo. They're coming down here. One guy died over here, probably from someone who came from down here, and they're trying to push up this valley here. They're coming probably around here. You know, there's so many different directions they can come from, and they're also coming down the road here and fighting over this little area right here. Since we have a big cluster of teammates right here, we can only assume that there's a lot of people inside this circle here, and we can also safely assume that there's going to be a lot of people on top of this mountaintop right here, because that's usually how the game plays out. Now you have to sprinkle in a little bit of in-game experience here, and if you actually see this game play out, what I end up doing is I spawn on this guy and I start running up here and I take down all the snipers up here. But again, it requires some experience, which you will eventually build up. But yeah, enemies up here, and we can see by the direction that these players are facing, we can see this guy, right? He's facing up towards that mountain, probably fighting, or he is fighting. He's fighting people up on top of that mountain. And we can see by the direction that our teammate is facing down here, and the teammate here, and here, we can see that they're fighting over in this direction. Let me clear this out here really quick. They're fighting over this little piece of land right here. So we can safely assume that we have a shit ton of, and remember what I said earlier, where our team isn't, we can safely assume that there's going to be enemies at. And again, you have to do educated guesses. Like, oh, well look, our team's not here, therefore the enemies are here. No. We want to make an educated guess. We want to assume that they're there only if we have other reasons, not just because our team's not there. It's very, very safe to assume that there's enemies here, and there's enemies coming out of here, down here, and probably down this road here, over here, because first off, our team hasn't pushed, right? If you see your team is pushing, like let's make believe, let's ignore everything else and just assume that this is the only guy here. If we see him pushing down the road, no one's there. We can safely assume that there's barely anyone there. But since we see our whole team just frozen right here in this little space, we know that there's going to be enemies where they are not, which is right here, which is right here, which is coming out. Where are they coming from? They're coming out of Bravo to these hotspots where our team is held up at. And again, you know, with this one, you can see the direction that our teammate is facing, right? He's facing up on top of that mountain, so that's what he's playing for. Alright, and that's it for this video. I didn't want to make this too long. Hopefully you guys understood some of the basics. You saw my thought process, and I explained it a little bit. If you want to see more detailed, further explanation and see actual gameplay to back up these claims that I'm making, you can watch that. I'll leave it in... I just put it right in the middle of the screen. There you go. It's right in front of your face. Just click that or go into the description. Click on the link down there. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.